May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. This is our prayer. Some of you may know that inscribed in small print along the edge of this pulpit, where only the preacher can see it, is a statement from the Gospel according to St. John. John chapter 12 and verse 20 describes an occasion when some Greeks, probably seekers, shoppers, questioners, as I know some of you probably are in the holy city at festival time, probably Passover, and they are reported to have approached one of Jesus' colleagues and said to him, "Sir, we would see Jesus." And those words, "Sir, we would see Jesus," are carved here in the fascia of this pulpit, where only I can see them, and Dr. McNabb sees them. And so today I'm going to talk about why we needed Jesus for the 21st century. The short and simple answer, of course, is that we wouldn't be here if it were not for Jesus. After all, he is the central figure in the faith of Christians. But today, what is the ground of his importance to us? The question of who Jesus is has fairly exploded in our lifetime all over the world, especially in what's called progressive Christianity. There has been a mass of Jesus research, much of it led by the Jesus Seminar with which Dr. McNabb is associated, seeking to separate the real historic Jesus and his message from the figure that we meet in hymns and art and drama and, of course, doctrine. I intend doing this morning, as I did with last week's address when I talked about why we need a God talk informed by cosmology. That is, I will say first what I find hard, if not impossible, to believe, and I expect probably will give offense to at least one person here, possibly more, but I accept that because that is your right to respond critically. The first thing I want to say then is what I find hard, if not impossible, to believe, and then I want to go on to saying what I do believe about Jesus in the 21st century. So let me tell you first and quickly about three things which are not part of my faith today, and indeed have not been for a very long time. First is the deifying of Jesus. In whatever ways this is expressed, it is unhelpful and it is overdue for challenge. There are two oft-heard expressions which are commonly thought to mean that Jesus is God in human form. They are both misunderstood if they're taken this way. The Hebrew word Mashiach, from which we get Messiah, and its Greek equivalent Christos, from which we get Christ, do not mean godness. They mean one who has the endorsement of God. And nor does the expression Son of God, which you bump up against sometimes in the Scripture, does that mean divinity. It does not mean that in Scripture. In Scripture, it conveys what we mean when we say something like, Agnes is a godly woman, or Bert is a godly man. We are not saying that they are divine. Nearly 50 years ago, in his book, Honest to God, the English bishop, John A.T. Robinson, said that however we put it, the traditional view of Jesus leaves the impression that God took a space trip and arrived on this planet in the form of a man. And to quote Robinson, Jesus was not really one of us, but through the miracle of the virgin birth, he contrived to be born so as to appear one of us, a divine substance being plunged in flesh and coated with it like chocolate or silver plating. Well, maybe a bit strong, but Robinson said more than that, actually, and you can understand why people said, get rid of him. But that's enough to make the point. It is unhelpful to go on saying Jesus is a God-man, the Nicene Creed notwithstanding. The process by which a guru from the Galilee became a God-man is a very long one. It took about 300 years. And it's not biblical. The second thing I want to say, I do not embrace theories of what is generally called atonement. Jesus did not take upon himself the punishment for sin that I should have borne, like the palace whipping boy who got a hiding on behalf of the prince when the prince did something to deserve it. Jesus was not the sacrificial lamb offered to ensure my forgiveness. Jesus is not the bridge in his dying that enables me to be friends with an otherwise unreachable God. All theories of atonement imply that God is unjust, cruel, remote, or all of these things, and they are all attempts to justify the death of Jesus as somehow orchestrated by God. And the third thing I do not believe that Jesus founded a new religion, much less the countless array of churches that all claim him as their founder. The facts of the matter are, Jesus was an observant Jew who never saw himself in any other terms than that. He was the leader of a renewal movement that was centered in and around the Galilee, and he was executed by the Romans, not by the Jews, as a troublemaker, basically because he said the laws of God must take precedence over all other laws and lawmakers, that being Caesar. And so he was a public enemy and he had to go. The fact that we have churches and synods and assemblies and priests and poobahs and pontiffs, at the very least, would have left Jesus absolutely gobsmacked. And sometimes, not facetiously, but seriously, I think to myself, poor Jesus. All that has been done in his name. So to the four things I do believe about Jesus, I want to tell you what these are quite quickly. The first is that Jesus is, to me, a supremely enlightened human being. For 30 years, an insatiable curiosity drove this man to relentless self-examination, to immersing himself in the stories and traditions of his people, to sitting at the feet of the scholars, and to listening for what I call the holy whispers. Thus and only thus did he become enlightened. The Dalai Lama, whom I've been fortunate enough to meet on several occasions, told me once in a long conversation that we had that he saw Jesus as a truly enlightened human being after the manner of the Buddha. And that's the meaning, of course, of the Sanskrit word, Buddha. It means enlightened. The late Arthur Peacock put it beautifully. I think Peacock was one of the towering figures at the interface between cosmology and God talk. He was an Oxford professor of biochemistry and he was an Anglican priest. Went to God a couple of years ago, unfortunately.